Good afternoon, Rotarians, friends, and guests. I'm Hannibal B. Johnson. It's my privilege as president to welcome you to the Rotary Club of Tulsa. When I awoke to unexpected additional snow on Monday, I thought, no matter this, I see light at the end of this winter tunnel. So I'm reminded of what Neil Gaiman, author of Odd and the Frost Giants, once wrote. He said, by March, the worst of the winter would be over. The snow would thaw, the rivers begin to run, and the world would wake itself again. Not that year. Winter hung in there like an invalid refusing to die. Day after gray day, the ice stayed hard, the world remained unfriendly and cold. Now, it's considerably nicer outside today, and we're Rotarians, so we're not going to be deterred by external conditions anyway. Whatever the weather, let's continue to be about the business of bringing friendliness and warmth to all those whom we encounter. If you haven't already done so, please take a moment now to silence your cell phones. A special thanks, as always, to Tom Wolfe for our pre-meeting musical interlude. Tom? Let's begin our program with the invocation from Tom Luckock, followed by Song and Pledge from Matt Davis, and visitor introductions from DJ Morrow Ingram.
Let us pray. Almighty God, we pray that as Rotarians, we may go into the world and be of service to all people. May we use those skills you have equipped us with for teaching, nurturing, and guiding others, that our lives may be improved by our actions. And give us the courage to risk ourselves so that all people may have a better life. Where the old and young stumble and fall, may we be there to give a hand. We pray for the men and women in our armed forces. May they know the assurance of your presence. We recognize the courage of authors like Adam Makos, who have documented the stories of those who have given their lives so we may have a better life today, and let us never forget the sacrifices of our veterans. We pray for the world's people and for those who are experiencing political unrest in Venezuela and those affected by natural disasters and extreme weather. We are ever thankful for the abundance you provide us, and thank you each day for your presence, your guidance, and your gift of life itself. Amen.
Let's sing an old favorite, God Bless America. God bless America, land that I love. Stand beside her and guide her through the night with the light from above. From the mountains to the prairies, to the oceans wonderful. God bless America, my home sweet home. God bless America, my home sweet home. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Good afternoon. I'm going to apologize up front for any mispronunciations of names. I'm going to read our host and visitors' names. When I call your names, please stand up so we can all recognize you, and if you'd please hold your applause until I've completed the introductions. John Croissant has Deb Croissant with Muse of Utica Square. I'm not going to presume it's his wife, but it could be. David Wagner has Lori Perkins. He also has Kevin Sartorius, both with Catholic Charities. Tom Lukock has Kathy Lukock. Prima Donna Braddock has Derek Braddock with Soaring Eagles YFS. Jerry Dillon has Denise Dillon with Dillon International. Jack McGlumpy has Charles Groom. Scott Philstrip has John Hamill. Thank you all for joining us today. We also have a few visiting Rotarians and Rotaract members from the Sands Springs Club. We have Harlan Pinkerton. Hi, Harlan. And we have 3 Rotaract members, Jessica Carney. Hi, Jessica. Precious Campbell. Hi, Precious. And Hannah Fitzgerald. Hi, Hannah. Thank you, and we hope you all will return. And if you're not a member of a Rotary Club, please consider us. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom, Matt, and DJ. And a special thanks to this week's meeting sponsor, We Be Trees, Tim Knoll. Our announcements. Committee meeting, Rotary Youth Exchange in room 233. Next week is our Above and Beyond Awards, recognizing a Tulsa police officer and firefighter of the year. Founded in 2008, the awards recognize these public servants for outstanding acts of character, commitment, and compassion to both their profession and to the community. Nominated by their peers, these award recipients have gone above and beyond the requirements of duty and exemplify the values reflected in the Rotary 4-Way test. Award nominations were provided by each department, and award recipients were selected by a committee of the Rotary Club of Tulsa. On March 20th, Dr. Todd Lassane, CEO of the Tulsa Botanical Garden, will be the speaker here at our club. Join us for a special Rotary Night at the Circle Cinema on Thursday, March the 7th. That's tomorrow. There will be a reception at 6 p.m., followed by the movie Breathe at 7 p.m. Breathe is the inspiring true love story of an adventurous couple who refused to give up in the face of a devastating disease, polio. It's a heartwarming celebration of love and human possibility. The cost of the event is $10 per person. There are still a few tickets that are available. You can register online through DACDB on the event calendar. Join Rotaract for some food, fun, and drinks at the Dust Bowl Lounge on Wednesday, March 13th at 5:30 p.m. You're encouraged to bring an under 40 friend. If you don't have any under 40 friends, then you need to visit with me after the meeting. Please RSVP to Jonathan Slay if you plan to attend. This week's Rotary inspiration is Tom Hardcastle. An anonymous Rotarian writes the following: Who isn't impressed by Tom Hardcastle? He must have near to perfect attendance, since I always see him at our weekly meetings. He always sports the face of a committed Rotarian. What inspires me most about that is that Tom enrolls in class every semester at TCC, where he takes a course in something that he may or may not know anything about. He simply seeks to increase his knowledge on a subject as a lifelong learner. That's a lesson for us all. Tom is a resource of knowledge and has a great historical perspective on the world and on our club. Tom sets a standard for living life to the fullest and is an example to follow. Thank you for inspiring us, Tom. So Tom Hardcastle, on behalf of the Rotary Club of Tulsa, please accept your Rotary International themed Be the Inspiration lapel pin for being our Rotary inspiration. Is Tom around today? Well, it's Sarge time once again, so let's welcome Daniel Gomez. Daniel.
Good afternoon. Sorry I missed last week. I was actually down with the flu, and to answer everybody's question, yes, I did get the flu shot. I got it very early, but it's only apparently 50% effective, and it's also impervious to grubby first graders, which I have one in my household. So even if you got the flu shot, everybody, use hand sanitizer, and if you have grubby little ones around, I can't help you there, sorry. But I'm feeling better. Hopefully the season's almost over. I liked your poem at the beginning. I'm skeptical, but we'll see, right? So a lot of finds are from last week. Got it going on. Let's see, is this one? There it goes. There it is. All right. So Matt Davis sent me this. He was on vacation in the Bahamas. 31 years in Rotary, 5 years of marriage. Here's some pictures of the resort. Oh, come on, man.
Technical
There it is.
difficulties.
All right. There's Matt and his wife, who he tells me won a second place in a hula hoop contest. So a round of applause for Matt and his wife. Russell Gibbs, $100. It's his birthday, February 23rd. Again, this was supposed to go up last week, but here he is. He sent me a picture with fellow Rotarians, David Downing and Jerry Stamper, who are sitting right over here. Thanks, Russell. Happy birthday. And this goes along with it. David Downing gave me $200 for his birthday, February 28th.
Wow.
Thanks, guys. Appreciate it. Kathy Gorell, $100. Her birthday is March 5th, and she's donating it to Camp Enterprise. So happy birthday to Kathy, and thank you. Here's Scott Fitzgerald, $118 for the 28th anniversary of his 30th birthday. And he sent me this really awesome picture. He said, I talked to him just a little while ago, he said he was 40 in that picture, but I don't believe him, because I'm not even 40 yet, and I'm not that cool. So thank you, Scott, and happy anniversary of your 30th birthday. So this is a cool one. This is Jerry and Eric Cullen, $78 in recognition of Rotarians Carolyn Wall and Eric. $12 for Eric's Tulsa World article. I'll follow up here in a second. $8 for the price of a TEDx ticket, because Eric will be speaking on that. And she threw in $2 because she's not making me do a lawyer joke. Can I get a round of applause for that, at least? So here, let me see. This is from Eric. So he and Judge Wall hosted 78 fourth graders from Monte Cassino. They helped the kids act out a skit of putting the big bad wolf on trial with the three little pigs, while teaching them our judicial system and the cool tools a private investigator uses to catch bad guys or to prove innocence. And I've been in front of judges, and that looks pretty intimidating right there. Here's the Tulsa World article. Let's see. His nonprofit efforts in justice reform having over 60 commutations granted over the last 8 months. So that's a pretty big accomplishment. Congratulations to you, Eric. So this is a big one. Prima Donna Braddock, $25 for, she appeared on Channel 6 on a terrific story. Two of her mentees, Aliyah Nelson, was accepted to a summer program at Harvard, and another mentee, Delashay Lawrence, was accepted to a summer program at Stanford. And this is all based on Prima Donna's mentoring through Soaring Eagles. If you Google this story, they're actually trying to raise funds because it's not cheap to do a summer program on the coasts. So please look her up or find Prima Donna personally, make a donation to help send these kids to the program. And please watch the video. It's awesome. It's inspiring. Thank you, Prima Donna, for everything you do and for representing Rotary. So Tiffany's about to speak in a few minutes about Above and Beyond Awards. I think she has purchased your attention for $500 donation to honor of the Tulsa Police Department. It's designated to the Above and Beyond Awards, but here's Tiffany and her old, for those of you who don't know, Tiffany used to be a law enforcement officer. This is, I believe, the Mingo Valley office. So there she is, and I know she's rolling around again, which is unfortunate. There you are. So thank you, Tiffany. And we hope that you get around a little bit better, all right? So that's all I have. Today is the beginning of Lent, and since I love doing this so much, I'm going to give up Sarge time for 2 weeks for Lent. No, in reality, I'll be out of town for work next Wednesday, and I'll be on vacation with my family for spring break the following week. If anybody takes a vacation, send me some pictures and a few dollars. I'll show it. I'm going to do the same thing. So thanks, everybody, and I'll see you again in 3 weeks.
Great. Thanks, Daniel. Next up is Tricia Kirkstra with Rotary Youth Exchange. Tricia.
Thank you, President Hannibal. Hi, everybody. Okay, so I have 2 objectives today. The first one is to inspire at least a half a dozen people in this room to go home tonight and have a conversation with your loved one about, let's host a youth exchange student next year. We're looking for our 3 host families, and you'll host them for 3.5 months. But we have to get it lined up early because of all the paperwork we do with the U.S. State Department. So your conversation tonight is going to go like this. Honey, I want us to have a 17-year-old whom we've never met move in with us for 3 months this fall. They're coming from another country and another culture, and the only thing they know about our culture is what they've seen through movies and music, much of it rap. As your loved one looks at you in horror, you will say, but our family will truly be enriched by this experience. It's true. Our family, we will see Tulsa, our community, our church, our friends through the lens of someone from a totally different worldview than our own. We will come to understand what 17-year-olds really deal with in this generation. And we will come to know Rotary on a family level. Those of you who are very deeply involved in committee work know what I mean, and there are many of you here because we've been in each other's homes. I can attest to this myself. When I joined Rotary in the year 2000, my first year, I was a young Rotarian. I really didn't know a whole lot about it. Tom Klenda approached me and said, Tricia, why don't you and your family host Daiichi from Japan? And I said, well, let me talk to my husband about it. We had a conversation just like that. But we embraced it, and we hosted Daiichi, and we came to love him, and we got to know Tom and Carol. I never would have known Carol otherwise. And so we got to know some other folks, and over the years, a lot of you know we've hosted a lot of kids. But what it really did for us was my kids grew up. They grew up, they're 29 and 26 now. They grew up as Rotarians. And they got to know other Rotarians. They know the Rotary life, and it's really impacted their life. And through Rotary Youth Exchange, I've gotten to know so many families of Rotarians. Because of Jerry Stamper hosting, I know Kay Stamper, who I love, and her sense of humor. She's just fantastic. And through Duff Weddle, I've gotten to know his wife, Mary, and what a passionate teacher she is. And I mean, I can go on and on. I mean, is John Raines here today? I love his wife, Kathy. How she puts up with John, I have no idea. But I mean, anyway, but you know, you get what I mean. We've really gotten to know one another. It's a fabulous committee to be a part of because we really get to know and work with one another. So especially if you're a new Rotarian in the club, think about it because it's a really great committee to join and get to know other Rotarians and to learn about Rotary. So my second objective is to get as many of you possible here today to come to our committee meeting this afternoon, because there is a lot that we do on Rotary Youth Exchange aside from being a host mom or host dad. We need a counselor, we need a local coordinator, we need someone to go into the schools and say, hey, do you want to be a youth exchange student and go on it? So there's a lot of work to do and ways to contribute that would help us. So after the meeting today, meet us in room 233, and if you want more information on being a host mom or host dad, we'll be glad to fill you in on that as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next up is Tiffany Egdorf. Tell us a little bit about Above and Beyond. Tiffany, you're moving really rapidly there. Wow.
The single upside to this darn thing is my speed, only on flat surfaces. So President Hannibal gave us a brief description of the Above and Beyond Awards. For those of you that have never attended, I certainly encourage you to be here. And for those of you that have attended in the past, I'm asking you to please come next Wednesday. If you're in town, bring a friend with you. We get to host, I think, one of the best award ceremonies in our community for a law enforcement officer and firefighter in our community. It's an honor for our club to have this event. And so I encourage all of you to be here to recognize our Officer and Firefighter of the Year. And we have a couple of other special awards we're going to do. Our room is full of dignitaries that day, if that interests you. The mayor is supposed to be here. The police chief and the fire chief usually attend, among other people. So come and honor those folks with us, and we'll look forward to seeing you next Wednesday.
Great, thank you. Next up is John Della Vedova, talking about Rotary Cares. John.
Hello, everybody. The mission of Rotary Cares is we give well greetings to those that are ill or in the hospital. We give condolence cards and sympathy to those that have passed away. And traditionally, we've always had blue cards on the table for years, and I've enjoyed signing those cards, but sometimes they were unseen or they were missed, and so we're going to take a new approach. Now we're going to send a beautiful card from the Rotary office. It's signed by the president and the chairman of Rotary Cares, and Linda's helping me out with a lot of these endeavors. So we're going to take it that approach. And one thing that's really cool is if you still have one of these directories, you ought to grab it, because I really miss this thing. And when I pulled it out, I couldn't believe how emotional you can get, because there's been so many people that are still with us that come to Rotary. This goes back to 2009, like Jim Burwell, Monty Curry, those that have passed away, like friends like Hal Calhoun, Ron Butler, Richard Gibbs, and Mike Fine. There's ones that have come back to Rotary, Anna America and Liz Hunt. They've come back to join us. And there's some missing in action. Steve Clark and Charles Nine, I always give them a hard time when I see them. I'm like, man, I'm worried about you. Where have you been? So many of you send personal cards on your own, and that's fantastic. I would really love to see you continue to do that and stay in touch with your Rotary members, because that's really what everybody does. Everybody in this room is a member of the Rotary Cares Committee. I didn't know if you knew that or not. There's only 5 of us on there, and when I joined this committee, I joined it because Terry Heritage was chairing the committee, and she's one of my good friends and clients, and now she can't see very well, and so she isn't able to come to the meetings. And there's other people like that in the same predicament. And so what Rotary Cares is staying in touch with people, and I'm going to see if Terry's here, and if she's not, I'm going to leave her a message, and this is kind of what I would like to portray as what we do. Let's see. She may not answer, and if she doesn't, that's fine. But in the meantime, I want you all to look around the room while we're standing here. Hey, Terry, this is John Della Vedova.
Yes, John.
I'm just wanting to let you know that I'm making a Rotary Cares announcement at Rotary, and I wanted everybody to know that I'm contacting you, and I wanted to let you know if you ever need a ride to Rotary, let me know. I'd be glad to come get you.
Thank you. I appreciate that offer, John. I've had some cataract surgery and some different things, so.
Okay, well, we all just want to let you know we were thinking of you. And everybody say, hi, Terry.
Hi, Terry.
All right, Terry, I'll be in touch with you, and God bless you. So what I was going to say is everybody look around the room right now, and if you see some people that are missing and you don't know where they are, give them a call. You might be able to get them back to Rotary. Thank you.
Thanks, John. Hailed as a masterful storyteller by the Associated Press, Adam Makos is the author of the New York Times bestseller, A Higher Call, and the critically acclaimed Devotion. Inspired by his grandfather's service, Makos chronicles the stories of American veterans in his trademark fusion of intense human drama and fast-paced military action, securing his place in the top ranks of military writers, according to the Los Angeles Times. During his research, Makos has flown a World War II bomber, accompanied a Special Forces raid in Iraq, and journeyed into North Korea in search of an MIA American airman. Should we have time at the end of his presentation for questions, please pose your questions from the aisle mic that you see out there in the center aisle. Please help me welcome now international best-selling author Adam Makos. Adam.
Thank you so much. It's a wonderful welcome, and I'm really honored to be here in Tulsa. What a gorgeous city you have. For somebody who writes about that era of the 40s and the 50s, I can feel that in your streets. I was a little late because, in a good way, the Art Deco, come on, the nice pace of life. I'm from Denver. It's a mess. Don't feel bad. I was a little late today because my publicist sent me to the Chamber of Commerce building, and I've been to some book signings where I've had hundreds of people, and somewhere I've had 4 or 5, and as I was walking around and nobody was answering, I thought, this is going to set a new record, but fortunately, I walk into this wonderful room. I'm here to tell you about this book, Spearhead. It's currently number 4 on the New York Times bestseller list, so it's doing quite well. And I always say I'm only part of the equation. The writer's only as good as the story he gets to tell, and the story's as good as the veterans who were there. And so I worked with some wonderful veterans. I'd like to tell you about them today. It's the story of an American tank gunner, his German enemy, and how these lives collided in the city of Cologne. At first I thought it was just going to be a great war story, but then I found out it's also a great story of humanity. And I'll explain that to you today. So I want to introduce you to our hero, a man named Clarence Schmoyer. And what you're about to see, I'm going to show you some footage that actually has a lot of meaning today of all times. March 6, 1945, Clarence was 21 years old, leading the U.S. Army into Germany, into the city of Cologne. And that was the day that this epic battle was fought. And this film that you're about to see, provided it works, this was all shot on March 6th. So 74 years ago today, this film was made when Army cameramen followed Clarence Schmoyer through the city of Cologne, through the streets, and into battle. So we're going to try to call up that film and show it to you. 21-year-old Clarence. Never gets old. It was an honor. Again, 6 years I got to work with this hero who I'm about to tell you about. We're going to go next slide here. Let's see if this works. I'm going to tell you a little bit about how I've come across these stories. You heard that I had written this book, A Higher Call. And A Higher Call was, let's see here, it's considered to be one of the greatest stories of humanity set in World War II. It was a story of a German fighter pilot and an American bomber pilot who had this encounter in World War II and later on became friends. All right, let's go back one more. Technology, it's okay. A Higher Call, there it is. Maybe some of you have read it. This book was about two men from different sides. Franz Stiegler, this German pilot who spared the American bomber crew. Two men from different sides who later on became friends. Another story, Devotion. Story of two men from different worlds in the Korean War. Tom Hudner from the New England country club scene, Jesse Brown from a sharecropper's field in Mississippi, who went to the ends of the world for each other. People say, how do you find these amazing stories? And in the case of Spearhead, I got a tip from a friend. A college buddy told me that there was this humble American tank gunner. Oh, no, that's not him. I'm not going to spoil that. A humble American tank gunner living in Allentown, Pennsylvania. And I went and knocked on his door. His name is Clarence Schmoyer. And supposedly he fought in the 3rd Armored Division. Now, what is the 3rd Armored? What is the Spearhead Division? I had heard of the 101st Airborne. I had heard of the 82nd Airborne, Patton's 3rd Army. Spearhead Division was somewhat unknown to me. The only Spearhead soldier before Clarence to attain any fame was that guy, Mr. Blue Suede Shoes, Elvis himself, had served in 3rd Armored Division back in the 50s. And so I was going into it, it was all Greek to me. But I knew that Clarence had done something heroic as a tank gunner in World War II. Somewhat of what you saw in that film. Here he is. When I knocked, he opened up the door for me, pulled up a chair, and I wondered how this humble, gentle man could be such a great tank gunner. And I found out that a lot of it lay in his nature. He was a protective person, and he saw those men in his tank as his family. There were 5 men in the tank. They were his brothers. They were his crew. And he knew that if he didn't shoot first and shoot straight, he could get them all killed. Because statistically, when an American tank was hit during World War II, 1 man was going to come out dead, 1 was going to come out wounded. So it was like a game of roulette. You could look around your table here and realize if you miss that shot, one of your buddies is going to come out in pieces and the other will be maimed. That's why he was such a great gunner, a gentle man, but a great warrior. And during World War II, that's Clarence right there, 21 years old. Now, he was a crewman, a gunner at first, on a Sherman tank. Many of you, I'm sure, have heard of the Sherman tank, the classic tank of World War II, the tank of the movie Fury, if you saw the Brad Pitt movie. And the Sherman tank was, a lot of people think it was a world beater, it was a leading tank, and it was a great tank in 1942. The problem is, by the time 1944 arrived and we brought these tanks over into Normandy, we're coming up against these German tanks, these Panthers and these Tigers. And this was the same Sherman that had been essentially fighting with the British since the days of the desert in Africa in 1942. So suddenly we found out that we had a tank that couldn't tackle the enemy. To fight a Panther tank, you had to have about 8 of these, and you had to encircle it, you had to flank it, and you had to shoot from the side or from behind. So a lot of people, a lot of historians say, well, this was a great tank. It helped us win the war. Well, it was a great tank if you were sitting from their perspective. If you were in the tank itself, it was a bad place to be because these German tanks were known to be able to shoot through one Sherman and hit the one behind it. They were known to be able to shoot through a building, both walls, and hit the Sherman on the other side. The German guns were just big. They kept making bigger, more powerful guns. They kept making more and more armor, and we kept our Shermans the same. And we just, in some ways, consider these men to be dispensable heroes. Now, in 1942, this Sherman had gone into battle. In 1945, something changed. February, after the Battle of the Bulge, we had lost so many Shermans that we actually had to borrow some back from the British to continue the war into Germany. We had lost so many that the tank crews were beginning to sound off in the magazines. They would say things like, we want a tank that can fight, not just drive around the countryside. One man said, if they give me a Panther tank, I'd take on any of the rest. And so the Americans were starting to sound off, and Eisenhower's wondering what's wrong, and suddenly we decide we have a real problem. So they ship over 20 experimental tanks. It was called the Pershing tank. First 20 off the assembly line went to Europe, untested. The next 20 went to Fort Knox to be tested. And when these tanks arrived, Clarence Schmoyer, our hero, was given one of them. Now, it had a 90-millimeter gun, it had an automatic transmission. This was a great tank to have. It could get out of trouble, and it could go toe-to-toe with any of the German tanks. The downside is, suddenly you have the best tank. What does that mean? It means you're going to lead the way. And leading the way is a real theme of Spearhead. What kind of man would saddle up for this? What kind of man would go first? Because leading often was a death sentence. When Clarence's tank commander would come back after the briefing each morning, his pipe would be a barometer of how difficult the mission would be, and usually the pipe was bouncing up and down in his mouth. It's because his teeth were chattering. Every time they saddled up, these men were terrified at what they were about to do, because in 1945, we are on the offensive. The Germans are on the defensive. What does that mean? It means they get to set up their tanks and their anti-tank guns. They get to camouflage them. They get to set their crosshairs on the hill that we're going to go over or the bend that we're going to go around, and they get to wait for the first tank to drive into their bullets. And so that's where Clarence found himself. When he got that new Pershing tank, he would lead the way every time. Now, again, it's a real theme. What kind of man would saddle up for this? And there's a little video I'd like to show you, actually. If we could get the second video going. And it's from the movie Fury.
Hear me, Gordo? You know, there's a Bible verse I think about sometimes, many times. It goes, "Then I heard the voice of the Lord saying, Whom shall I send? And who will go for us?" And I said, "Here am I. Send me." Book of Isaiah, chapter 6.
Two simple words, send me. And that was what Clarence was thinking. That's what he and his buddies lived for. It was, he had a different way of saying it. He said, "We have the biggest gun, we belong out in front." And it's kind of the same thing these guys are saying. We're the ones who are meant to handle this. Now, on March 6, 1945, 74 years ago today, Clarence was leading the way through the city of Cologne. It was the second day of the battle, and the goal was to reach those spires. The Army cameramen at that time in the war were finally able to send back some announcements. The Spearhead Division usually ran in silence because it would break through the enemy lines and disappear and sow chaos behind the lines. That's why it was such an unknown unit. So Clarence is leading the way. The goal is to reach the cathedral. Behind the cathedral is the Rhine, and the goal was to get a bridge across the Rhine. Now, the Germans blew up the bridge, so suddenly the fight was about something different. It was about securing Cologne. Cologne was known as the fortress city of Germany. Hitler had ordered it defended to the last, and it would also be our largest urban battle in the European war. So it was street-to-street fighting, house to house. Very dangerous environment for a tank. Clarence had been warned. You have to worry about Germans with Molotov cocktails from the roofs of the buildings. You have to worry about anti-tank guns dug in at street level. You have to even watch the basements because the Germans had tunneled from wall to wall in the basement. So they would disappear into one building and they'd appear down the street. Any German could take out Clarence's tank. All it took was this weapon called a Panzerfaust, like a glorified bazooka that would punch a hole through the armor and the molten metal would spray among everyone inside. Very dangerous place to be fighting, and yet he's leading the way, as you saw, street to street. Now, it was here that Clarence first met Gustav Schaefer, a man who I'll tell you about at the very end of our talk. Clarence first met Gustav through his gun sight. He had come to a large intersection, and across the intersection, he saw a German tank nose out. He saw it pull back. Again, compounding the nightmares, there's German tanks in the city of Cologne. Well, Clarence and Gustav start trading machine gun fire, searching for one another. And then Clarence has a bright idea. Cologne had been hit by so many airstrikes, 262 to be exact, that as he started to shoot through the building, armor-piercing rounds trying to hit Gustav's tank. And he saw the building, bricks falling each time he shot. So he decided, I'm going to bring down the building on him. And he shot 5 times, spaced his shots, and he did. He brought a building down on Gustav's tank. Gustav would not be able to fight anymore. The gun was knocked off its mount, and Gustav got out and ran away. He survived, and he would live to maybe tell the tale. So that was the first tank Clarence encountered in Cologne, but it held him up. This is, again, the man who was supposed to lead the way to the cathedral. Someone else had to take lead. And that day, it was 2 Sherman tanks from his sister company. So up a parallel street, they're going toward the cathedral. Now, these young men, again, 74 years ago today, thought they were about to conquer the city of Cologne. The tank commander, his name was Karl Kellner. And Karl was 26 years old from Sheboygan, Wisconsin. He had a fiancee back home. He used to be a grocery store clerk. He won the Silver Star in Normandy. He had been hospitalized twice from his wounds. If anybody was the perfect hero to conquer the city, it was Karl. But there, in the last hour of the battle, right when victory was in front of him, a German tank struck. Let's go to it. Oops, sorry. And that German tank hit the Sherman tank, and Karl Kellner is actually seen here. You saw him earlier in the film, but it was so quick, the poignancy is lost. Karl's gunner got out first, and his gunner dove over the side of the tank, head first. That's an 8-foot drop from the turret. So that was how great the terror was. They had been hit once, and they knew that these Sherman tanks were catching flames, and a German tank was lurking out there. And Karl came over second, and he rolled over the side of the turret. And when you watch the video very closely, you see that his right leg is missing below the knee. And he rolled there to the back of the Sherman tank, and the cameramen who had been filming all this are just watching aghast. And one of those cameramen that day was a future journalist named Andy Rooney of CBS. And Andy set down his camera. He was at that time an Army reporter for Yank magazine. And he went up, and with 3 others, they carried Karl Kellner back to a shell hole, tried to tie a tourniquet on him, but he bled to death right there in the last hour of the battle. So Karl died. And his driver, Julian Patrick, was in the front of that tank, and there's a very famous and horrible photo of him. His eyes are still open, he's dead in his seat, and he's looking forward at the tank that had killed him. There was another young man there, Cecil Morris, who died that day, never to go back to Texas. Julian Patrick, was from Kentucky. So 3 young Americans killed in the last hour of the battle. What did this? Who did this? Well, from a tunnel next to the cathedral pulled a Panther tank. This was the pride of the Wehrmacht, known as the nightmare of our tankers, because it was known to be all but impervious from the front. The call goes out. We need someone to deal with this tank. It parked itself right in front of the Cologne Cathedral. There's an interesting metaphor as well. There's this house of God and this machine of war parked in front. This crew had come out to fight to the last man, to fight to the last round, to kill to the last hour, because a lot of other Germans were escaping across the Rhine. They were swimming on any wood they could find, using it as a raft. Others were coming out waving white flags, but this crew had stayed to fight to the end. So who will go for us? Who will go forth? Clarence's crew answered the call, and they moved forward through what was known as the Wall Street of Cologne, is where all the banks were, on a parallel street. Now, they expected an easy victory because that Panther tank had been facing the 2 Shermans it killed. But then that German tank gunner, who was a great veteran fighter, he got restless, and he decided to turn his gun to the empty intersection to his right, the same intersection Clarence was about to enter. Now, Clarence had a plan. He told his driver, here's what we're going to do. I'm going to set my gun where I think this tank is. You're going to pull us into the intersection, and we're going to shoot once, and we're going to back up. Because he knew German tanks were typically not knocked out in one shot. But when they came to that intersection, the driver saw it first. He found himself looking down the black hole of that German tank's muzzle. 75 millimeter gun, super velocity, able to snuff their lives in an instant. And what the driver did was he stepped on the gas, and he launched the tank out into the middle of the intersection. Now they're sitting ducks, and we're just lucky Clarence was the gunner he was, because without aiming, he just knew his sights were on that German tank, and he fired, hitting it anywhere he could. And it worked. He hit it once in the rear toward the engine compartment, and it rattled the German gunner. The German gunner wasn't able to squeeze off a shot. But Clarence knew better than to stop there. He called for another shot, because if any of the 5 men in that German tank reached up in his last gasp and pulled that trigger, the Pershing was going to go up in flames. So Clarence shot it a second time, further forward. Then he shot it a third time, further forward. His goal was to make that tank burn. And what happened was, you can actually see in the film, you can see the crew come out one by one. All but one came out, actually. All but one survived. But he succeeded in destroying that tank, making it burn. Now, after this was over, minutes later, his tank pulled back, and an Army journalist came up to him, and he knocked on the tank, and he said, "Clarence, I captured it all on film." See, this intrepid Army reporter had parked himself up in the building to shoot this film, and a lot of the film you saw earlier. And if you pick up a copy of Spearhead later, there's a wonderful thing you'll see. The cover of the book is a photo of these men. And I urge you to look into their eyes, because 5 minutes earlier they had stared death in the face, quite literally. And you can see the bow gunner, he's smoking a cigarette really fast. You can see the driver, he's spacing out. You can see the tank commander, he's holding his helmet, he can't stay still. You can see Clarence with the soft cap and his curly hair, and he looks like he's seen a ghost. The only man who's got this really cool debonair smirk is the loader. His name's John DeRiggi from Scranton, Pennsylvania, and he's kind of leaning there on the turret and he's smiling. It's because John DeRiggi didn't have a periscope. The loader never saw anything. So the only guy who didn't see the tank is the one who's enjoying the fame. But that newsreel went around the world. Clarence's family saw it at home, and they became known as the heroes of Cologne for doing this. There's a picture of their tank after they reached the Rhine. They radioed back, any further and we'll be swimming. So again, this crew became world famous back then. They drifted into obscurity ever since. But back then they were in Newsweek, they were in the newsreels. They were the heroes of Cologne. So that's the end of the story, right? I interviewed Clarence. We have a great book. He destroyed a tank. Well, there was more to it. When I was in Allentown, Pennsylvania, interviewing him, he said, by the way, this may interest you. I have a letter from the German I fought against. I said, wait a second, he's alive? He said, yeah, his name's Gustav Schaefer. I'm thinking about meeting him. I said, thinking about meeting him? This has to happen. Because I'd written this story about two enemies. I love seeing World War II from both sides because it allows you to truly tell a war story when you can see it from the German side and the American. And Clarence said, I'm thinking about meeting him. I said, well, how about this? If I fly you over there, take care of you, get all your expenses, because, you know, it's expensive going over there. I said, would you let me report? Would you let me tell this story? And he said yes. Now, he spoke of this connection with Gustav, and I'm not going to ruin this, one of the reasons behind their meeting, but he spoke of his tank at that intersection where he first battled Gustav. He spoke of a car running through their crossfire, a civilian car. He spoke of medics tending a wounded passenger who had driven through the crossfire of these two enemies. He spoke of needing to heal from something, from a woman who had been caught in their crossfire. See, Clarence was still stuck with a lot of the wounds of war because, like many of those heroes who came back, he didn't talk about it. He bottled it all up, and he never shared his war stories. His own neighbors, his own family didn't know who he was or that he was living in their own neighborhood. And for that reason, a lot of it was still in him. So he needed to go meet Gustav more than just to make a good book for us. For him, it was about talking. It was about healing. It was about putting the war behind him. And I was fortunate. I got to watch, and we're going to skip that one. I got to watch in 2013 as Clarence and two of his war buddies, one of his fellow tankers named Chuck Miller. Chuck was from Versailles, Missouri, and Buck Marsh from Auburn, Alabama. Buck was the young armored infantryman who used to ride Clarence's tank into battle. They went with him. It was sort of a moving support group of other veterans urging their friend to make this difficult mission. Again, he's going to face his enemy, to talk to his enemy, to talk to the man who had once tried to kill him. This was not an easy thing for Clarence. But I got to watch as these men approached in front of the cathedral where Clarence had once knocked out that Panther tank. And I got to see these old war buddies shake hands and make amends. When Clarence approached Gustav, he leaned over and he stuck out his hand and he leaned in close and he said, the war is over, we can be friends now. And Gustav said, ja, gut. See, Gustav had been a POW of the Americans, so he spoke enough English to understand what was going on. And after this, they went back to the hotel. They both had a beer in hand, and they started telling stories. And I'll just tell you, they actually hit it off, Clarence and Gustav. They started joking. Clarence once said to Gustav, again, I have my tape recorder rolling, I'm just taking it all in. He said, hey, Gustav, did you have a refrigerator in your tank? Because we had one in ours. And Gustav said, oh, yeah, he played along. He said, but only in wintertime. And Clarence wasn't going to let it go at that. He said, oh, yeah, but we also had a toilet in our tank. And Gustav said, oh, we had one too. He said, in the empty shell casings. We found out that these two men shared a lot in common. Gustav was a young kid from humble origins. He was from a farm in northern Germany, no electricity, no radio. His family used to farm the fields during the day and sometimes by the light of the moon. And a cute little story about him, they sometimes had a Russian POW work on their farm. You see, Germany had a labor shortage due to the war. They had a Russian POW, and there was a rule, because every night the authorities would come to collect the Russian and take him back to the prisoner camp. And there was a rule. They said he's never to eat with the family. He's not to sit at the same table as you. So Gustav's mother had an answer to that. She set a table in the corner for the Russian, cutlery, food, and all, and then she sat him at the table with them. And the idea was when that knock at the door came, he would run over and he would sit at his own table. But she said, you know, he does the same work as us. We're going to treat him all the same. And that's how I came to understand that this Gustav, even though he was born under the wrong flag, even though he was fought on the wrong side, his father was drafted to the Eastern Front, and one day he was drafted into a tank. And so that little man in the black beret, he actually was a good guy, just on the wrong side of World War II. And when you see his story, you really feel it. Because Clarence wanted to be there. He wanted to be fighting for his country. Gustav didn't. And it makes his battles even more difficult. So again, these guys would come away as friends. Gustav even shared that his favorite hobby was Google Earth. So he would sit there at his desk, surrounded by encyclopedias. His wife had died, so he was alone in the house. And he would go on Google Earth each day. And he would surf the world, exploring it. And he said, Clarence, I see this silver car out in front of your house most days. What make and model is that? And he said, also, tell me what it looks like inside the house, because my satellite can only go so far. And so he had sufficiently stalked Clarence. At the end, they put their hands in a circle. It was kind of silly. It was something that only their generation would do, but it was actually a beautiful thing to watch. And Clarence and Gustav came away as friends. They would stay pen pals. They would exchange Christmas cards. They would even Skype on the computer. Gustav had to give Clarence a little prod, but he brought his friend up to the modern age. And one day, Clarence opened up a laptop. Gustav sat there at his desktop, and they talked face to face, 5,000 miles apart. So what I thought was a great war story, in the end, was actually a great story of humanity. And that's why I was so fortunate to tell this. I hope you'll discover it. It's a rare way to see World War II. I often say it's a 1 in a million story. And if you actually do the odds, it's probably more than that. The fact that Clarence, one of the last 4 survivors of his unit, would be living 70 years later to tell me the story. The fact that Gustav, the last survivor of 160 men, would be living 70 years later to shake his hand and to become his friend. If you actually do the math, it's incalculable. Thank you so much for having me.
Are you going to be able to stick around? You're going to sign books and everything.
Yeah, I will.
Thanks, Adam, for a great presentation. Now, Adam will be available to sign copies of his book. The books are presented here to my left by Magic City Books, and you can pose whatever questions you may have at the book signing table. Thank you once again for a really compelling presentation. A book recognizing today's program will be presented to our partner in education school, Celia Clinton, and this week's book is How to Catch a Leprechaun. So I'm going to ask Adam to go ahead and sign that book, if you will. It's right there in front of you. Yeah. As always, let's not lose sight of that grand Rotary International vision. Together, we see a world where people unite, take action to create lasting change across the globe, in our communities, and in ourselves. With that, we are adjourned.